Hey everyone, welcome yet again to another episode of Elevate.Strategy Leadership Live Fireside Chat. That's becoming a bit of a mouthful, so I'm going to shorten that out. But today we are on Tuesday. Today's not Friday, today's Tuesday, and a very special day because we have a very special guest, very special, near and dear to my heart, but we'll talk about him in a second. But first of all, thank you so much, everyone, for bearing with me last week. I didn't have a broadcast last week. I actually did, but it's pre-recorded and needed to get clearance. So this gentleman needed clearance before I could release the video. So that video will come up shortly. I promise you that will not disappoint you either. He's the CEO of a very large consultancy in Canada. So look forward to that. But in any case, Elevate.Strategy continues to chug along. Today in Toronto, it's really cold. I know you guys don't care about weather alerts, but I like giving to them. So it's my show. Anyway, as usual, you guys are not here for me. So I'm going to introduce my guest for today. And I'll tell you why he's so near and dear to my heart. His name is Mandeep Malik. Many of us who are watching or watching post-production will know him as Professor Malik. He's the Associate Professor of Marketing and has been teaching at the DeGroote School of Business at McMaster University since 2000, which happens to be my alma mater as well. He brings extensive business expertise to his teaching role, given his industry background in marketing, sales, and product management. His interests include marketing strategy, sales effectiveness, experiential marketing, and brand marketing communication. His innovations in experiential education have impacted career outcomes for hundreds of students across Canada through programs like the Mars Apprentice, Canada's Next Top Ad Executive, Canadian Marketing League, High School Business Heroes, and many others. Mandeep, Professor Malik is the recipient of the Provincial Lift Award for Faculty Leadership, President's Award for Teaching Excellence, Faculty Association Teaching Award, and multiple Student Union Teaching Awards. He is an Impact Fellow for Teaching and Learning at McMaster University and works collaboratively across disciplines and has multiple industry affiliations to advance education. And welcome, Mandeep.
Hey, Simeon, good to see you.
Good to see you again. It's been a while, especially because of COVID. I think it's been at least 2 years then, that means, right?
Easily, yeah. We've seen each other on screen though, so that's good.
Yeah, I know. How are you holding up? How are things these days on the university campus?
Well, my course just got back to in-class teaching as of a week ago, so it's a nice feeling to be back on campus, to have the hustle and bustle and the positive energy that surrounds us, and hopefully that'll get me out of the languishing mode to feeling a lot better. So it feels like spring is around the corner.
Yeah. Well, for those of you who don't know, of course, you don't know me that well, but Professor Malik is a professor that I met about 20 years ago now at McMaster University. And Professor, you and we never were in this. I never took a course from you, but I remember working with you and working for you as a TA.
Yeah.
For the audience, you think about on this show, which is really about career journeys, etc. I have a lot of conversations with leaders, and inevitably gets down to things like mentors and sponsors and teachers. And as you know, over the years, I've told you that you've had a tremendous impact on me in multiple ways. So for the audience, this is one of my personal mentors. I consider him a mentor. I don't think he considers me his mentee because he's got so many students that he's impacted. But Professor Malik, I won't put you on the pedestal anymore. I'm here to learn about you. I've never heard the full personal journey story of your life, but I do know that you live the life of a professor that is extremely busy, dealing with all kinds of things going on with courses and classes and students, and I'm sure colleagues and other administration. So for those of you who don't know you, and I know there are a number of people from DeGroote who are watching or going to watch post-production, maybe you can introduce yourself, tell us a little bit of what you do.
Sure. So, as you said in your introduction, I'm now an associate professor. I've been here for 22 years. Marketing is my area of interest. But equal area of interest is consultative selling, strategic selling. That it's a course that I developed and I have been teaching as an elective. Um, and outside of my, I am what they call the teaching stream at DeGroote. So research is not really a big part of my responsibilities, not even a small part, I should say. And my entire focus as an associate professor on the teaching stream is um, is to bring about good learning outcomes for students of marketing. Make sure that marketing as a subject matter thrives. Um, Create affiliations that give students access to career opportunities, access to knowledge from industry leaders. So more than anything else, I suspect outside of the classroom, I act like a bridge between
Mhm.
industry and academia. So
Yeah.
that's pretty much me in a nutshell in my current role.
Yeah. And I can attest to the fact that you are a bridge for sure, because on several occasions where I've been working, you have come and visited me and tried to procure information and kind of help with a lot of the academic programs at DeGroote from industry. So, and whenever I've come to the events that you've hosted, there are so many people who are from industry who know you in that regard. And I can't say that to be the case for very many professors. So, we'll go back to that in a minute. And part of the reason it's the case is in the introduction was to say that you have industry affiliations from before you taught, which is I'm keen to hear about that. Um, I guess the question about teaching for you is, maybe you can sort of begin, if you don't mind, going back a little bit to your journey about where you came from. What were the earliest kind of inspirations for you to go into something, maybe wasn't starting with business, but how did you journey towards getting to where you are today as a professor?
Mhm. So my career, in fact, started in business, Simeon. My first role right out of school was actually in sales, business to business sales for a medium-sized firm in India that had a national footprint, and that's where I cut my teeth. It's a role that I enjoyed thoroughly because it was customer facing, involved hard-nosed negotiations. There was pressure of targets, and there was a sense of disappointment and achievement and an accomplishment that came with every day. Within that role itself, I knew that I had a bend for more strategic, creative work. So within the same firm, I transitioned into brand management, product management, sort of a hybrid role at their corporate office in New Delhi. And when I moved out from that firm, I joined one of India's largest software development firms, and that got me into shall I say, a new industry where IT and information systems
Mhm.
were just coming into India and causing a lot of economic activity
Mhm.
as automation settled in, and that was a tenure that lasted less than a couple of years when I moved within the same firm into on the consulting and training side and played a meaningful part in setting up an entire training infrastructure for for sales forces in India. That at that time the Indian economy was you know transitioning to foreign direct investment. We had a lot of big brands coming into India, and there were a lot of you know um, home brands that were trying to fight this expected
Right.
storm
Right.
from global brands. And we ended up getting opportunities that helped prepare, uh, in a sense, both sides for an imminent market warfare.
Right. Model. Yeah,
Um,
sure. Professor, let me just go back 1 second here. So you said that when you graduated, the first role was in business, was in sales.
correct.
Was that intentional, or is that something that you kind of just fell into because there was nothing else to do?
Um, it was, in a sense, I would say it wasn't intentional. I had not really thought about building a career in sales. I had thought about a career in marketing, as distinct from sales. But that's an opportunity that presented itself. Um, when I got into that role, um, I did not anticipate what I was signing up for. So, but given the dynamic nature of the role, given how dynamic B2B markets are, I embraced it and fell in love with it.
Hmm.
And quite interestingly, um, you know, 10 years later, I was working on my master's thesis, which in Australia, which had a focus on the need for higher education and sales, right? So
Okay.
this learning that I had at the start of my career came to play an important part in in my growth as someone who was integral to setting up India's first foray into sales education and sales training,
Right.
and then later wrote his thesis on what sales education could look like if it
Mhm.
were to be offered by post-secondary institutes.
Right. And I think maybe that was the formative years to, even if I think about sort of a shadow backwards to where you are today, you're a teacher, you're at heart. We talked about this, you're an enabler. Someone kind of wants to come alongside and help people to learn. And I can see that sort of as a foreshadow of what was to come, right? Um, Tell me a little bit about what was the environment like back in India those days as far as impact on marketing? Because marketing has completely shifted. Obviously, it's digital. The customer experience is absolutely changed. But tell me about maybe some of the challenges that you faced. I mean, you didn't have the internet, right? So a lot of it was what, door to door knocking kind of a thing, or what was it
Yeah,
like?
in the B2B market, yes, it was very much showing up for cold calls, dealing with gatekeepers and purchasing leaders and getting access to users and decision makers. So it was a tough grind, so to say, but it was a rewarding grind, because when you are in sales activity, Simeon, the the feedback is in the moment that
Mm,
your actions take place, and that part I like, that I could see a potential customer changing their mind, transitioning,
right.
uh, you know, uh, dropping their guard and sharing information with me
Hmm.
about the conditions in which they were trying to build their business, which allowed me to then look at gaining an understanding of what were the problems that we could address for them, and bringing about an understanding of those solutions, and then working with maybe an advocate within the business to bring it to the attention of a decision committee or a decision maker and get that signature on the dotted line. So it was challenging as well, because the brand I represented was not a market leader. uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and obviously that made it interesting, but also the fact that it was a very hyper competitive marketplace. There were a lot of choices for customers. There was easy substitution. um, so sales, was an activity that came with a ton of pressure,
Hmm.
performance pressure. Uh, Luckily, the role I was in, it wasn't commission based. There were bonuses, there were commissions, but there was a base salary that kept you going.
Hmm.
Um, and while being in that role, in a sales role, Simeon, and getting affected by the marketing activities of the business or the lack of marketing activities of the business, I
Right.
started seeing an opportunity for, uh, you know, career growth for me to be able to go into a different role and change the resources that were made available to sales teams, whether they were product literature or
Hmm.
it was mass media advertising to be able to drive demand, or it was, promotional activities that would add value to this brand that was well liked, but
Right.
still did not enjoy the same kind of equity that other brands did.
Right. So if you were to compare similarities back then in marketing to today, what things have not changed? It's still hyper competitive. It's a hyper competitivity that's global now, right? Where
Yep.
uh, consumers B2C consumers have choices that are hyper competitive. Obviously, B2B continues to be the case. What are some things that have not changed as far as the mentality towards either marketing or marketing effectiveness?
I think the only interesting shift has been, one is, of course, we've gone digital, right? So
Hmm.
information is more easily available and accessible to your potential customers. Um, but it has also created means by which you can research your customer, reach out to them, establish some familiarity even before you meet them face to face, so you're not a stranger showing up and knocking on the door. And that has obviously helped both marketing as well as salespeople. The other thing is that um, this shift of power from provider to customer or consumer um, has in a sense created an interesting balance, right? So what we saw when I was in the playground of sales or in the playground of marketing was that as marketers we decided what information to share at what point in time, and with whom, right?
Hmm.
So we could be in a sense selective and time it very thoughtfully, and
Right.
a lot of brands still do that, but there is much more transparency now, right? It's
Yeah. Yeah.
we operate in fish bowls and we are being watched as we are actioning our marketing. So
Yeah.
that,
Consumers can fill in the blanks for
yeah.
themselves, right? Yeah,
And
absolutely.
the other interesting thing is now, customers and consumers are participating in marketing, right?
Mm.
So
Right.
they are becoming co-creators and they are helping shape uh, product design. They are helping shape where they want to meet the marketer, where they want to meet the salesperson,
Right.
and on what terms, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. I promise my audience to not talk shop on this show. So I'm going to go back to you in your career because I'm still very interested. So you were in India, you did sales and marketing. And how many years did you do that? How did you end up on Australia? And what made you do a graduate degree at that point?
Well, my wife was uh, committed to pursuing a clinical fellowship in
Okay.
her field in Australia, and we had two young children, so
Mm.
I had to take a leave, a paternity leave,
Mm.
Simeon, which was an utter surprise at that time in 1995, and it was probably the best decision of my life to
Wow.
be a
Okay.
stay-at-home dad for a couple of years and help nurture a 3-month old and a 3-year old and play that meaningful part. It's not something I would have done. It's not something I was trained for. It's not something I had seen, but
Right.
I jumped into it. And while in Australia, as my son grew up and my daughter grew up, I quickly realized that I could now access opportunities that would put me back into the student mindset, right? And I had experienced some of it as a trainer, trying to put myself in the shoes of learners. So I jumped at that opportunity and started my master's by research in Australia. And that became fascinating because I had zero orientation to research, but nonetheless, I learned on the job as the basics, right? So obviously, graduate research at a PhD level, at a doctoral level, requires a different kind of rigor. At a master's level, it was more manageable for me.
Right.
Um, and my focus was more qualitative in nature than quantitative. That too made it slightly more digestible.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
And it became meaningful. Going back into the university environment, Simeon, created this love for learning, love for developing curricula, um,
Mm-hmm.
and here I am, 27 years later.
So you went from Australia, and how long did you live there for before you
We were there for 4 years,
okay,
Simeon, and then moved to Canada. Yeah.
and you went straight to McMaster?
Well, this was just, I got lucky. I came here, I was looking for an opportunity. It just so happened that I was at the right place at the right time, with a skill set that could come to the advantage of the university. So it worked out, right? Uh, by even a stretch of my imagination, it was all luck, just being at the right place at the right time.
And sometimes that happens. Yeah, it
Oh
happens.
yeah.
It's happened for me a lot of times. I'm just seeing the LinkedIn number of viewers. If anyone has a question for Professor Malik, or if it's your first time meeting him, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop it down, and I'll show it up there. But um, so I had a question for you that it was not on the sheet that I gave you prepared, but it's hopefully not going to throw you off, and nothing throws you off guard as I've seen. You often publish and share a lot of very insightful stories, articles on LinkedIn. I noticed that your source is obviously usually quite academic, and a lot about leadership. I have seen you in different leadership settings throughout the years. I've seen you work with students for sure. I've seen you work with obnoxious students, students who are care to learn. You certainly have treated that. I've seen you with your peers. I've seen you with industry executives, and you always have a posture about you that is um, almost unwavering in a sense, and it shows a certain degree of leadership that I've always appreciated. I wanted to ask you, what are three characteristics of a solid leader you've always aspired to be, you've always aspired to have? Uh, you humbly say you don't have that today, but about leadership itself, what's important to be a good leader these days?
One leadership lesson I learned quite early on from my mother, who probably was a great example to me in her work and in her demeanor and the attributes that she displayed, um, uh, and that was integrity. Right, integrity was paramount in whatever she did.
Hmm.
So that's something I caught on to quite early on, and I realized that I have to make that some a foundational element of who I am. Right. So that was one. The second lesson that I also learned from her was, which had to do with um, you know kindness and compassion, right? With
Hmm.
a great mix of humility, right? So even though she was top of her field as a physician, um, there was really, um, you know, there's no real ego that ever showed up in her interactions with, whether it was her patients, if her as a patient was somebody from a marginalized group, or a patient was somebody who was privileged, or from her peers, or anybody else that was accountable to her in delivering healthcare services. So that too stayed with me as a combination of humility, kindness, and compassion. And the third lesson, I should say, I picked up from some of the leaders I worked for, whether it was in my first role or in my role subsequently, and that was of being a committed mentor and coach to my team, right? To be able to give them not just the resources that they needed, but be there for them, right?
Mhm.
Um, uh, Help them understand problems, give them the capability and confidence to work on those problems themselves, and be that scaffolding that they could rely on
Mhm.
whenever they needed, to feel safe to experiment and feel safe to try new things, test ideas, and to think outside of the box. So
Right.
yeah, that those would be it, right?
Gotcha. And as far as role models for you, your mother being one of them for sure, and the bosses that you worked with and for sure. Um, when you think about the landscape of leaders today, I think as far and wide as a large corporation or small and whatever it is, uh, do you have any favorite or leaders that you kind of admire from afar, or separately, maybe this one has integrity, this one has kindness, humility, this one, who would you say kind of, you asked this question once to one of my guests around if you could spend a day with a CMO, who would you be? So let me ask you this: if you could spend a day with a leader, who would that be and why?
My my I was over the last few years really sort of fascinated with the journey of Indra Nui, who headed up PepsiCo,
Yep.
and obviously, one part of that admiration came from the fact that she too had roots in India,
Mm-hmm.
but also, the time at which she was leading a global corporation the size of PepsiCo as a female leader and doing it with such finesse and such um, so admirably. It's something that I came to admire, and
Mm-hmm.
I watched multiple interviews, and it only reinforced what I had come to believe about her. Whether it was clarity of thought, ability to set a vision, uh,
Mm-hmm.
the ability to see into the future well before others could, right?
Right.
And then, she is also one of the people that I see as being very principled, right?
Right.
Obviously, that's my impression from afar, but
Sure.
nonetheless,
Yeah.
it is there. Yeah.
Gotcha. So you would want to spend time with her to understand how her mindset is, etc. I think that public, be, along with the transparency that has come up since we talked about marketing, is also transparency in leadership, and that's very clear to me. That's one of the reasons I think that I left corporate, was because there were issues with leadership that were quite clear, and um, that really need to be dealt with probably at the root level of that. So on that note, you work with students all the time. You're a teacher, a professor. What are some of the characteristics that you try to bake into young students today, as far as fostering them into businessmen, businesswomen of the future? Of course, integrity is important, but what is the kind of some of the root causes, the challenges that you try to put in front of them to really press them and push them and really stretch them out, right? Because I've spoken in some of your classes, I've TA'd your classes, and you can be pretty harsh, right? Sometimes. But what is the root cause of you're trying to get what out of them in order to drive them to become better people, better leaders?
Well, every time I've thought about it, I've come to the same conclusion, Simeon, and that is that there is potential that I see in them that is far beyond the potential that they might see in themselves, right? And I know that I can't just say this to them and they'd be like, okay, in that case, So I have to create opportunities that do stretch them.
Mm-hmm.
I have to give them feedback that does alert them to when they are right, when they are wrong, right? What they have considered, what they have missed. One of my favorite go-to phrases for my students is like, "Hey, you don't know what you don't know. So how do we figure that out, right? How do I create an environment whereby you can get access to what you don't know? Because I want you to be able to peel back the layers, look below the surface, become curious, ask questions, and be very purposeful in your approach to understanding and solving problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
um,
Right.
so you know when we are discuss for example, my marketing course is completely case based, right? And when you would have experienced this, when
Mm-hmm.
we are talking about those cases, they tend to have these knee jerk reactions where we are discussing a problem and they're talking about solutions, right? And I have to bring them back. It's like, okay, first let's establish what the problem is, what are the indicators of the problem. Let's go in and say, hey, why is this happening, right? What's the root cause?
Mm-hmm.
Where
Mm-hmm.
is this coming from? And
Mm-hmm.
then we'll figure out how to solve it, right?
Right.
So that mindset that I try to develop, of course, not only do I hold them to a standard that is higher than they hold themselves to, but I find that when I express this belief in them, they take chances on themselves, right? As long as they feel safe, as
Yeah.
long as they feel,
Sure.
hey, if I fail, I'll still be fine,
Right.
because I can let them fail safely while they're at school, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Once they are out and working, right? Uh, every time they fail, those might be tough landings, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes learning the lesson too late in life makes life very, very difficult.
No doubt.
Um, so that's leadership. And and as far as yourself is concerned, so um, one thing that I'm always very interested in about any kind of leader is some of the struggles that they've been through. And without going into a whole lot of detail, but really more around, you talked earlier about establishing the problem. Here's the root cause, and here's the solution, right? So the solution part, when you're going through some of the struggles, maybe you can share one or two of them that were major decisions you had to make, or whatever. It doesn't have to be like, but what helps you through those situations of time, like, what are some things that you do, or some things, people that you talk to, whatever it is that helps you through life journeys. And finally, just last thing is, the reason why I ask this question all the time is because as an executive coach, about 3/4 of my clients inevitably in their story to me always get to the point of, but this is actually what happened, right? And then the kind of the floodgates open, and this, it's a lot of difficulty and struggle, and I just want them to hear other stories. So what about you?
So, I'm a great advocate for evidence-based decision making, right?
Okay.
McMaster is also known for evidence-based medicine or problem-based learning, and those are two schools of thought that I have bought into soon as I joined McMaster in 2000, right? Because they made complete sense to me.
Mm,
So, in whether it's in my classes with my students outside of the classroom, or in my own life, I do look for, where can I see the evidence that will guide me and keep me on the right path, right?
mhm,
And what is the strength of this evidence?
mm,
So, so that's one. Obviously, it slows you down a little bit. But luckily, in an academic setting, when you're working with courses, you're not moving at the same speed as the marketplace, and that's fine. So these are well thought through choices where it prevents mistakes, right? So
mhm,
more thought goes into making that choice. The other is that I find, for me personally, if I have access to other perspectives,
Mm,
that really helps me. Um,
mm,
where other people are looking at the same problem or looking at the same solution and providing me a perspective that I did not have. So I find
mm,
that very enlightening. And even in my classes, I try to bring that about in the thinking of students, right? Like, sure, you are looking at making this decision. How do you validate this choice, right?
mhm,
Has somebody made a similar choice? Is it informed by, a principle, a framework, a best practice?
mhm.
Right? Is there something that gives you a higher degree of confidence in this choice, right?
Right.
So that too, and especially in my own decision making, I find that validation and perspective of others seems to matter for me, right? So, dare I say, if I was in a C level position, I would be someone who is turning to the C suite and saying, "Hey, how can we make a decision together as a C suite, rather than how is it that I can make a decision and then you have to act on it, right? Carry it through."
Right. Yeah, it seems like you're a very logical person when it comes to dealing with difficult situations. I think what you're saying is looking for evidence that justifies some sort of response, right? Either you're a choice that you make or whether it's a feeling that you have, and not allowing the emotion of that time to over dictate how you make a decision, right? I think that perspective is very important, though. As you talked about, it's not only for young people, it's also for those who are more senior, seasoned, right? In that when you're going through a difficult time, and a lot of people because of COVID are transitioning, or a lot of people because of COVID have reflected a lot more on their lives. They might be very stable in their jobs, but they're thinking about legacy. They're thinking about, have they made the right impact in life? And the perspective all of a sudden is like hits them in the face, right? Because life is so busy, and now they've had time to think about that. That perspective is very important. What is your perspective as far as your career, right? So as you think about the future, and all these programs that you've grown, when I was at McMaster, there's very little that was being done, and now there's so many different varieties of marketing programs and activities that students can take part in, most of which have had your handprint on it. What is your perspective on the journey now of your teaching career? Like, what do you hope to achieve? My thinking, by the way, Mandeep, is that you should write a book. You should definitely write a book. And I don't know what it would be necessarily about, but there's probably just profiling people that you've met and kind of what their observation, because you're a very observant person. What is your perspective on the rest of the impact of your life? What is it that you hope to, if you accomplish this one thing, you will have lived a well-lived life?
Um, and this thought has never really left my mind ever. There is an abundance of gratitude I feel for having the job I do have. Many years ago, I was in a forum where my colleague and I were being recognized for our contributions to teaching by the university. And it was interesting. He was speaking first, and he got up and said, he's like, "Hey, if the university were to actually ask me to pay the university to do the work I get to do, I probably will." Um,
Mm,
and I thought about it right there and then, and many times after. It's like, yeah, if the university wanted me to pay them a salary so that I could work for them, I probably will, because I absolutely love what I do, right? To
mm,
have an
mm.
opportunity to shape careers, to give open doors for people, to bring about learning, to bring about curiosity, to bring about a hunger and drive for creating better, for giving a value system to students that they can lean on, um, and use as a compass to navigate their futures, that is, I mean, honestly, it's just a blessing, right?
Hmm.
So, I look forward to nothing more on a daily basis than coming to work and being in a classroom and creating a learning environment where there is there is a positive emotion that is prevailing and getting people to pursue understanding of problems, pursue the creation of solutions, be critical thinkers.
Right.
So I haven't really been able to look beyond this particular blessing of being a teacher and being in this spot, bearing this responsibility. Um, and people have asked me on occasion, it's like, hey, when are you planning to retire? And I haven't been able to put a date on it either, because I know this keeps me so makes me so happy, and maybe it keeps me young and thriving.
Yeah.
But hey, book is not a bad idea, though the only time it has crossed my mind to write a book, it has always been about short stories for children. Um, and I have I really, really enjoy them. I remember my grandmother telling me short stories, and those became a part of my memory bank. And those are important inputs for young kids. Whether they are 3 or 5 or 7, and they have access to stories which unravel for them the mysteries of life, right?
Mhm.
Um, so that has crossed my mind, but it's never not something I've really gotten into.
Yeah. Never. You're never stopping to be a teacher. That's what I see. I can tell you when you're going to retire. It's an obvious. You're going to retire when you run out of money paying the university. Which,
Yeah,
and
I
the other thing is, why didn't you pay your students to teach them? I mean, you could have you.
yeah, and I may not have paid them monetarily, but I hope for many, many of them, I removed roadblocks that brought about a momentum, and brought about rewards that they had not anticipated, right? My entire social circle, Simeon, which includes you, is all past grads, right? I didn't really have any immediate family here in Ontario or Canada or the GTA when we moved here, and this particular community that I was a part of over the last 22 years is the community that gives me the support system that I need, right? So
Hmm.
there is, the payback is coming, and it has been coming for a long, long time.
Hmm. Well, I can tell you for a fact that you have had a significant influence on many people, and I know that you'd be the first one to just sort of dismiss that, just because I've had a lot of classmates who've gone through Mac, a lot of people who are younger than me have gone through Mac, have said the same thing, and when I mentioned to people that I'm interviewing you, I had probably one of the greatest responses from people shooting me a note saying, "When is it?" So anyway, look forward to, I guess, messages coming to your inbox after this, because people have not heard your story before, in reality. But anyway, we're coming up to time, so I want to respect your time and the audience's time as well. But I have a few rapid fire questions. I don't know if you've
Sure.
seen any of my interviews, but I love to ask them because they're very interesting to make people squirm. But they're the same all the time. So when for you, what would you be? What's your alter ego profession? If you weren't a teacher, a professor right now, what would you be doing?
I would say it would probably be an author of children's books. Yeah,
Really? Okay.
yeah.
You should do it.
I should. You're right. Yeah,
Have you started?
No, I just penned one story for my daughter and my son and shared it with them, and that was about it. But yeah, that would, the anything that allows me to feed the imagination of young ones and makes them dream is something that I have always wanted to do.
Yeah, I love that. That's wonderful. Okay, what is one word that you love?
Is it love? I would say integrity.
Okay, yeah, for the reasons that you've already talked about, for
Yes,
sure.
yes, and it served my mother well. I saw it from the sidelines, serving her well, and giving her a clear conscience that allowed her to hold her head high and be proud of every choice she made. And that's one lesson that has always stayed with me.
Got it. And what's one word that you hate?
Ah, probably doubt, and you
Okay.
know, because there is so much doubt that prevails amongst us, whether it is about people or things or um, actions, right? It's as if m- many of us spend a large part of our time second guessing what we are thinking, second guessing what we are doing. Um, and that, I think, to a great extent, propagates a negativity that doesn't really serve any of us well.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, on that note, you've always had a very good balance of giving people it's straight up, not so much about doubt, but when things have not been prepared properly, that it's not going to work out, right? And I appreciated that about you. That's not doubt, that's lack of preparation. And there's people who fail often fail because they have miscalculated how much effort it needs to be put into do something. And so there needs to be that certainty there that comes from, it's not a place of doubt, but it's a place of how likely is it that you're going to succeed if you don't work hard, right? So that's something that I would observe about that. Okay. What book title or movie title would best describe you?
Book title or movie title? Um, I guess a recent one by Brené Brown, Atlas of the Heart.
Hmm.
I think that would describe me because yeah, that is where my mind rests, in my heart.
Got it. Gotcha. And last one is what's one COVID hobby or habit have you developed?
Hmm. Hadn't really experimented with mindfulness until COVID came about.
Okay.
Um, and I did experiment with mindfulness and meditation, and I found that it was very, it settled me. It created a flow and a harmony that I needed. Um,
Okay.
yeah, and I found a favorite rhythm that I could access, which had to do with Tibetan bells.
Okay. Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much, Professor Malik. I really appreciate your time. I know you're busy. Behind you are a bunch of books, and you look very like a disheveled professor, as you would in the background. And I know you've got a lot of work to do preparing for this the semester, as you were saying earlier about online versus in person, etc. So, if you could stick around backstage, we can just wrap up. But I'm going to close off here. Thank you so much for your time once again.
Thank you for having me, Simeon. It's a true honor. And I appreciate you taking the time to unravel the mystery of Mandeep.
It's a infinite. It's an infinite well that never ends. All right. Thank you so much.
Take care.
All right. So that was uh, that's a glimpse into my life. And you can ask my wife, and if I were to sort of list out some of the key people in my life, in my career, especially. Professor Malik, Mandeep would have been one of them. In fact, he said once to me that you should go and pursue a PhD or something like that, some graduate degree. And I asked him why. He said, well, because you're suited for it. And maybe I should have listened to him, because, well, now I'm doing something that I love to do, but it's not in corporate. It's not where I started off. But in any case, thank you for joining us, guys. Again, reach out to Mandeep. If you want to get to know him, he's very, very friendly. Obviously, he's an enabler. He's a very encouraging gentleman as well. So reach out to him. But until next time, have a great week. And oh, by the way, stay tuned for the interview with the CEO that's going to come up soon. Hopefully, they'll get clearance pretty soon. And I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Bye.